Oh, well, welcome back. We're still tackling what it looks like to start thinking about tighter times, and with the legislative session ending up, I think school administrators probably can be pleased for the most part with the way this session went, minus the budget issues, but I think those are will continue. So I appreciate you taking some time to be with us today. We're going to go back and revisit some personnel issues that I think are important as you think about not just this coming year, but you start making plans for the next few years so that you can kind of get ahead of what is ultimately going to come at us. So I want to start by, first of all, admitting a correction I need to make. Falls under the category of even old grouchy guys can learn things. I was told at one point in my career that transportation and food service transfers were free. Like, basically, you make those transfers to cover the expenditures. Well, and I never had to do that in my 13-year career as superintendent. We always had adequate fund for balances. But it was brought to my attention that bus transfers specifically have to occur over 8 years if you're going to transfer for that reason. So in other words, I got a bus, it's depreciating out over 8 years, and I need to transfer that. And facilities transfer over 20 years. I always used fund for balances just to pay for the buses, and we had adequate SAT transfers to cover that. But I wanted to make sure and point that out because I had said that you could transfer to cover a bus. The facility bus depreciation is used on the calculation of your transportation funding, but that transfer is important that you make note of this. And the practical application down at the bottom is if you're unable to pay for a bus, so in other words, you don't already have enough in fund for to pay for that bus, then you probably need to consider financing that would time at the same pace as you're able to transfer over those 8 years into that account, so that you can buy the bus over time. And then the other option is to just rent the bus and make those payments out of operations. And a lot of times you'll see districts do that with ECSE. So anyway, wanted to point that out. So today we're gonna jump into personnel costs. We're going to talk about what it looks like to RIF versus what attrition can accomplish for you. We're going to talk a little bit about student-teacher ratio and some things you need to probably consider as you look at places to maybe dial back a little bit of your staffing. And then at the end, I'm just going to touch briefly on block scheduling and how that can drive up personnel costs a little bit. So just a reminder, I want to go back to this. I think I shared it in the when we talked about personnel the first go around, but I think it's important to understand when you're thinking about just positions in totality. So in other words, we're talking about what FTE we have in the classified pool. And maybe your district has 10 in the classified pool, or maybe you have, 700 in your classified pool. You need to kind of figure out what is the average wage that you pay somebody in your classified pool, because if you're talking bigger numbers, so in other words, a district with 10 can actually go in and say, okay, if I cut employee A, I know exactly how much that employee makes. I can calculate their retirement, et cetera. And so if I don't replace employee A, I'm going to save $28,502. A bigger district that has, 50, 100, 500 classified employees is going to need to work more on averages. And so I put this in there to bring to your attention that if you determined your average classified employee was making 25 grand, the cost that you need to look at for reductions is more like 35,000. So 140% of what the wage is actually what the cost to the district is, because you're having to match retirement, Social Security, Medicare, And then obviously you've got the expense of the health insurance. And just thing to think about, the higher your health insurance premium is in your district and the lower your wage is, the greater that percentage down there in the bottom right is going to be. So in other words, if my average wage was 24,000, but I was paying 8,000 in health insurance benefits, this percentage is going to go up, maybe 145%. So just remember when I'm talking about how much can I deduct for personnel positions, it's not just their wage, it's the benefit that is included. Certified employees similar. The only thing different is most of the time your certified employees are not going to have a Social Security OASDI withholding. And so it's just going to be their wage, their retirement. And just a reminder, when you're calculating retirement, it's wage plus the benefits the district pays. So health insurance, if there's a accidental death, dismemberment, any of those little benefits that you pay for the employee. In this case, I've got $6,000 down here. So to get your retirement, you add the wage plus the health insurance multiplied by the 14.5%, and that creates their retirement that you're having to match. So for certified employees, because the average wage is going to be a little higher and the health insurance amount is going to be the same, the percentage of total cost to wage is going to be a little bit lower. So for this district, if I were in this district that had this average wage for certified personnel, I would probably I might deduct 60 grand because you're also going to save a little bit um, for work comp and different things. So I might use 60 grand as an easy number to calculate how much I'm going to save per person. All right, so that's just kind of a reminder to think about scope and how much. So we're going to jump into attrition now and talk about what it looks like to not fill positions through voluntary exits, retirement, resignation, transfers to, another place, their families moving. Anybody that leaves without being told to leave essentially is attrition, or maybe even you could even be talking about potentially a somebody that was non-renewed and that position is open. But it's a voluntary exit, essentially that they're leaving. Um, and let me just say non-renewed. They weren't going to be non-renewed, so they volunteered to resign. But you've got open position now, and it's a matter of when you evaluate with your leadership team, etc. Is this a position that has to be filled? And it can be any position. It could be a custodial position, or it could be a teaching position. It could be a central office position. But the discussion around it is in a time where I'm having to dial back numbers, I already have a position that's open and the inherent cost that goes with that position. Can I do without it? Can we work around it? And here's some of the reasons why you would do that. Less trauma. Obviously, you're not taking a position away from somebody. The position is already open. It's less impactful on culture. Nobody lost their job. Nobody was forced to not come back that wanted to come back. Less political. So you don't have, people in the community discussing, why did you not bring this person back versus that person? Um, it's a natural opportunity for reorganization. So let's say you've had a group of 5 teachers in an elementary grade level, and it's the enrollment level is such that really you probably could have gone back to 4 a year or 2 ago, maybe, but didn't really want to break up the team, didn't want to disturb the political environment there. And now is a natural opportunity. Now somebody in that 5-member team left. Now's a great time to go to 4 without having really a disturbance to what had been going on. And then I think the other thing that is important is you always have to think about we're cutting back, but the expenses for the employees aren't changing. In fact, they're probably going up. Gas prices are high. Diapers, whatever it is that they're having to buy, the prices of those items are not going down. So there's always a desire to continue to support the people that are there. So attrition maybe allows you to dial back positions so that you can use some of that savings to provide the raises for those that are still there, so that they're not frozen. So those are some of the benefits of attrition. Some of the challenges are it's slower and gradual. So in other words, you don't just say we're going to have attrition of 20 teachers this year. You have to decide maybe there are only 10 that left. So we can't get to 20 through attrition. We may have to fill some of those 10. So maybe only 5 are open positions that we don't fill. So there's a limit, and it might take, 2, 3, 4 years to get all of the cuts you need through attrition. So that's one of the challenge. Also, the challenge is it's random. You can't choose who leaves in the places where it would best fit. So in other words, if that group of 5 teachers I was just talking about, none of those 5 left, but their grade level above only had 4 teachers, and we can't do it with 3, and one of them left, then you can't leave that position unfilled. You might be able to move that teacher in the 5 group to that group to fill that spot, but I mean, that's not truly attrition because you're moving somebody from their position. So it's random, and it's less able to be structured to exactly what you need. So then we talk about reduction in force, and that's an active decision made by the board and administration to reduce staffing levels. And that's either we're going to non-renew some probationary teachers, we're going to eliminate some positions, we're going to have layoffs because of our declining enrollment or the finances, and then we may be just reducing or restructuring some complete programs. We're not going to fill those needs in that program, and so we're going to RIF those teachers related to that. And so some of the pros of reduction in force is that you get the immediate financial impact. So if you need to cut 20, like I was mentioning, you can RIF 20 teachers so that you get the immediate financial need that you were after. You can be strategic. So you can go find the spots where, hey, we need to RIF here, we need to RIF here. These are the places where it makes the best sense. It doesn't matter if they're open positions or not. These are the positions we're going to go move away from. And so it can be much more direct to where you need it. It can create larger reductions than attrition. Like I said, if you can cut all 20 versus in the attrition example, we were only cutting 5. So it's going to get you there quicker. And then it can reset the organizational structure. Again, if you're going to cut a whole program, you're going to cut it, maybe, merge a couple of departments, whatever that might look like, you can reorganize your structure with a RIF. But here are some of the cons that you run into and why attrition, oftentimes, if you can do it, is a better alternative. Impact on morale. Obviously, you're taking somebody in a RIF situation, you're taking somebody that wants to be teaching, that need, or yeah, it's teaching positions are what we're talking about. So they want to be teaching, they want to be where they're at, and now you've removed them from that. So there's going to be some morale not only on that person, but probably their friends and people that support them within the district. There can be some political community fallout of, you're spending money on X, Y, and Z, but yet you let my neighbor go and now they don't have a job. You can lose talent because when we get into the next slide, we'll talk about some of the rules of RIF. And so it's not just the ability to go get those teachers that are not performing as well as others. There's some rules as to who can and cannot be RIFed. It can destabilize the building, the district, because of those changes. And then lastly, the legal and procedural complexity of a RIF is something that you absolutely want to take into consideration. So this is really small print, and I told Kelly I would send him a PDF of this, but Penny Rector was kind enough to send this to me, point to the statute where it's listed, and give me the things to kind of talk about, remind people of. And so I want to highlight a couple of the items. First, number two applies to teaching positions only. So I think I mentioned that, but that when we talk about RIF, we're talking specifically teachers. Most of the other positions, um, they're at will employees, and so come the end of a term, you can make decisions that aren't quite as legally tied up as the RIF is. Then there's always a question about how who can be riffed? Can I riff this teacher that's lower performing and keep this teacher that's high performing? And this just walks you through who and how you can let people go. And also a reminder that if somebody is riffed and they're on that leave because of reduction in force reasoning, lower budget, declining enrollment, etc., then you have to be aware that if you bring staff on, you have to be aware that they're on the top of the list for who comes back. And so it's very important not only that you know the rules of who can be RIFs, but that you also have documentation of who is currently on a leave of absence because of a RIF situation, because they need to have the opportunity to come back to the district. So I would encourage you to spend some time looking over this just to get some high level understanding of RIF. But I would also strongly encourage you if you get in this situation where this is the method you're going to use, I would make sure you're engaged with your district's attorney to make sure that you do it in the right manner. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about student teacher ratio. And this is the DESE standard pulled. Well, it's the standard that's in the QS or CSR. And I put the location where you can find this. It was in MSIP 5 as a resource standard, and now it's in the CSR. But this is kind of what they expect a district to follow: a recommended standard and a minimum standard. And your districts will likely, in many cases, fall between the two. And in some cases, even below, better than the recommended standard. This is a tool to use when you start talking about student teacher ratios in your district and why you're not filling positions, because teacher A is going to be upset because you didn't fill a position in that grade level. And now they went from having, 18 third graders to now they have 22 third graders. And you can come back and say, well, yeah, we're still between well under the minimum standard and really close to the recommended standard. And oh, by the way, by trimming that position, we're going to be able to give you a raise this year. So this is good to fall back on. I've worked with districts that have really, really low student teacher ratios, and are flabbergasted when they go to, 13, 14 kids in their class. And so um, just understand this is a fallback, helps with the political issue if the board or your community have concerns about the student teacher ratio. So here's a couple of examples. Example one, you've got a fourth grade in a building that has 125 students with 6 teachers. So you're presently right at about 21 students per teacher. And it looks like next year they're going to be at about 122 students. Can we reduce to 5 teachers? And the answer would be they would be at 24.4 students in that classroom, which is still, 2.5 students below the minimum standard. And those that have taught for 25 or 30 years would can tell you stories when they had 28, 30 kids in their class. So it can be done. And I think if you want to go a step further, there is research out there about the number of students in a class before you really start diminishing the ability to properly instruct them. Example two, second grade, current situation, 38 students with 3 teachers. And so that's 12.67 students per teacher. Next year, we're going to get 3 more students. It looks like in second grade, can we reduce to 2 teachers? And the answer would be yes, you can go down to 2. You'd be at 20 and a half, which might be a little bit of a shock for the 2 teachers that were there before, but certainly still well below the minimum standards. And for calculating that, I mean, it's pretty simple, just like these examples. In the elementary grades, it's just the number of students in a grade band by the number of teachers in that building. And so once you get to um, maybe junior high, certainly high school, it becomes a little bit more difficult because some classes are going to have higher numbers than others, and that becomes a little bit more of a scheduling effort, just kind of a looking at sections that are available type thing. But it can be done at the high school as well. It's just not near as easy to calculate it as it is in your elementary grades. I want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about block scheduling, and then we'll open it up for questions today. But block scheduling, and this takes me back before I was even in administration. My mother was a principal in a high school that had block scheduling, and the superintendent said we need to cut block scheduling because we need to save some positions. We can save some money by going back to a traditional schedule. And the teachers were not happy. Mom was wanting to stay on the block. And so I said, well, let me just run some numbers to see if that's really the case. And of course, like I said, I was teaching business ed and coaching. I hadn't had any administrative experience. Well, I ran the numbers and was told to her by her superintendent, yes, it is more expensive. So if your district has block scheduling, this is one area where you might look at a potential shift to save some personnel costs. And if you just think about it at a very high level, you're offering 8 sections for students rather than 7, so there's 14% more periods to cover. A teacher, if it's a true block where the teachers have a period each day, so they're teaching 3 out of the 4 blocks every day, then your teachers are covering 75% of the student's schedule, and so that's 75%. And uh, in a traditional 7 period day, they're covering 6 of the 7, so you got 86% coverage. So just from a very high level, you've got more periods to cover with less coverage efficiency to do it in, and so that's going to create more teachers that are needed in a block schedule. So that's something that's just another way to think about it. So kind of in review, we talked about in session two, I believe it was, the how to manage personnel costs and the fact that it's anywhere from 70 probably to 85% of a district's budget, and how do you put things in place to start to dial back that cost and still take care of your number one resource for educating kids, which is your staff, your team members. And so this is just some ideas with the attrition versus the RIF, and then thinking about if I put out in a template, in a map, and I mapped out all of my classrooms across the district, are there places where I could use attrition first and not fill a position, and then maybe after attrition, maybe the next thing is to ask a teacher from Smith Elementary to go to Jones Elementary where we had an opening, and we can do without the position in Smith, but we need them in Jones. And now we've disrupted one teacher. They still have a job, it's just in a different place. And then ultimately getting to the RIF situation, which is we're going to go take jobs away from some people because we can't afford to have them here, um, or the enrollment doesn't support them being here. So that's kind of a range of ideas to think about as you begin to trim back your personnel costs. So I don't know if Kelly is still with us or not, but I am going to stop sharing it and open it up to any questions that I might be able to ask, minus the details of the RIF, because I'm not gonna get into the attorney's business. Any questions?
Hi, Jim. I had thrown a question in the chat. I was just curious if, when there's central office people that are on teacher contracts, are they treated the same as if it's the teacher in a classroom?
I'm going to wait out there and say you probably need to check with the attorney, but I do not believe so. I believe it is only people in teaching positions, because I think maybe what you're referring to is they are paid, maybe tied to the teaching position. Take
Versus
their
an
pay
administrative
is
contract.
related to the teacher salary schedule.
Correct.
Yeah, I believe that the attorney would tell you that they are not in a teaching position. They're
Okay.
just That's just how you calculate their pay.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anybody have an answer that they're comfortable sharing with Amy? Anybody else? All right. Well, I'm gonna on June 9th, Carol Embry will be covering. Oh, so I guess I should before that, the next two Tuesdays will be taken off. Tuesday after Memorial Day, first Tuesday of June. Then June 9th, Carol Embry will be on here just talking about kind of the process of budget reductions and what that looks like. And then we'll come back the 16th, 23rd, and 30th and have the final three of this fiscal year. If you have topics that you would like to hear about, that we can research and prepare for, if you let Chelsea Blair or me know, we can try to work that in. We haven't carved into stone yet the three sessions the last 3 weeks of June. So if you have topics that you'd like to know more about, certainly let me know or let Chelsea know. My email is jcummins at drjimcummins.com, and you probably have Chelsea's, but we will try to make them what you need. One more offer for questions and let you get back to your work. All right. Well, we'll call it done, and I guess when Kelly gets back, he can shut it down. Thank you all, and have a great week.